Hi, I'm Mike from 1A Auto. We've been selling auto parts for over 30 years. We're dedicated to delivering quality auto parts, expert customer service, fast and free shipping, all backed by our 100% satisfaction guarantee. So visit us at 1aauto.com, your trusted source for quality auto parts.
In this video, we're going to be working with our 2001 Ford Ranger 4.0 liter V6. We're going to show you how to remove and replace your harmonic balancer or crank pulley. If you like this video, please click subscribe. We have a ton more information on this truck as well as many other makes and models. And if you need this part for your vehicle, you can follow the link down in the description over to 1aauto.com. Here are the items you'll need for this repair. We're going to use an 8mm socket and ratchet to loosen the terminal on the battery, or you can use a wrench. Loosen the clamp, wiggle it off of the terminal, and tuck it somewhere down to the side where it won't accidentally come back and complete the circuit. Your harmonic balancer or crank pulley is located all the way down here at the bottom of the motor, just below the fan pulley for your accessory belt. Start by disconnecting your mass airflow sensor, the two tabs on the airbox, disconnecting it from the airbox. Remove this breather hose. Remove these two bolts here. They are either a hex or a Phillips head. I find it's easiest to remove them with a Phillips screwdriver. There's also a 7mm bolt at the rear of the cover that we'll remove with the socket and ratchet. Remove the cover from the vehicle. Using a flat blade screwdriver, loosen the hose clamp around the end of the intake tube. Remove it from the throttle body and remove this entire assembly from the vehicle. Hold one of the 10mm bolts on the water pump pulley with a long wrench. Secure a pair of groove lock pliers or the appropriate size wrench onto the nut for the fan clutch. Then loosen that. This is not reverse thread, so you turn it counterclockwise. Once it's loose, you can usually remove it from the fan itself by spinning it. We'll rest the fan inside of the shroud while we remove that. Remove the two 10mm bolts at the top of the fan shroud with a 10mm socket and ratchet. Then grabbing the fan and the shroud, lift up and remove the shroud from the tabs at the bottom. And remove the fan and shroud from the vehicle together. In order to remove your harmonic balancer safely, we'll have to remove our starter and use a pry bar to hold the teeth on your flex plate or flywheel to prevent it from turning while we loosen the bolt on the harmonic balancer. Your starter is located on the driver's side of the engine, bolting in from the engine side into the bell housing on the transmission. If you have a four-wheel drive vehicle, it will be located just above the front differential. The starter is held in with this nut securing the ground to this studded bolt, which we'll also remove. And a 13mm bolt at the top of the starter here, as well as under this red cap, which we'll have to pop off. There's a 13mm for the main power supply to the starter solenoid and a 10mm nut securing the signal wire onto the solenoid as well. Using a 13mm socket and ratchet, remove the nut. You may have to hold the other head of the bolt here with the 13mm wrench, but usually you can get these to come off without twisting. We're using a 1/4 inch drive here because this is a pretty tight space, but you may need to use a larger ratchet to break the bolts loose and then finish removing them with this. Once the nut is off, we'll remove our ground strap and allow that to hang off to the side. This red cap simply pops off. Be sure to remember which way it comes off. You see it's in an L shape here. This will only go back on that one way. The 13mm nut is located all the way at the top of the starter solenoid. Just kind of have to feel around for it. Once you've located the 13mm nut, remove it with the socket and ratchet. The 10mm nut for the starter signal is located at the 3 o'clock position. For the nut you just removed, remove that with the 10mm socket and ratchet. We'll then reach up and pull both the signal and main starter power off of their studs. Now remove the 13mm bolts at the top and bottom of the starter. Remove the top 13mm bolt. In my experience, the starter only comes out one way. You'll have to pull back and drop the bottom of the starter through this opening around the differential first, and then pull back to release the flange from the opening. Remove your starter. Remove the 4 10mm bolts securing this plastic cover underneath the radiator. We're going to use a socket, ratchet, and a long extension for this. We put our vehicle on the lift to make it easier to show you, but you should be able to do this job with the vehicle on the ground. You may need a flat blade screwdriver to remove the plastic push pins securing it in, but usually you can just grab both sides and pull down. Using a long pry bar, we'll brace off of the differential into one of the teeth on our flex plate. Your flywheel will be in the same position if you have a manual transmission vehicle. We'll hold that nice and tight. Using a breaker bar with a 19mm socket and extension in the middle of the harmonic balancer. We'll rotate it counterclockwise to release the bolt. Once the bolt is loose, we'll spin it out about halfway by hand before removing our serpentine belt. Use the 3/8 drive of our ratchet into the tensioner. Turn it counterclockwise to release the tension. We'll try to just remove it from the harmonic balancer. Try to leave everything as close to in place as we can to make it easier to reinstall later. Be sure you have a belt path either drawn or still on the cowl of your vehicle. Using your harmonic balancer puller, we have these available from 1aauto.com. You'll want to get the right thread and length bolts to sit into the 2 threaded holes in your harmonic balancer. We found ours here. We'll also need the actual puller shaft here. So we'll thread these into the 2 openings in the harmonic balancer and then tighten this down against the bolt, which we've loosened out about halfway. That should bring the pulley off of its splines and allow us to remove it freely. I'll only get these started a couple of threads at first so we can line up both bolt holes. You want to make sure the 2 bolts are tightened down fairly evenly. This will make sure that we get a nice even pull when we're removing our balancer. That looks pretty straight. Now we'll spin the center bolt in as far as we can here, just to get some tension on it, help line it all up. Using a 19mm wrench, for our particular puller anyway, you'll want to tighten that down, slow and steady. until you've released the balancer from its splines. All right, now ours is bottomed out on the center bolt, which we only loosened about halfway. So what we'll do is loosen up the puller bolt here in the middle. Reach in, we should be able to loosen this bolt some more by hand. You may feel like you can pull your harmonic balancer off now, and if you can, it's perfectly fine to do so. However, ours is still on there pretty tight, so we're gonna have to back the bolt out some more, make another pull. Now, if your harmonic balancer is really stuck on there like ours is, you may need to remove the factory harmonic balancer bolt and get something the same thread, only a little bit longer, but we'll reinstall this into the center of the harmonic balancer and use it to keep pulling. Install your new bolt, at least a couple of threads. Now, your biggest concern when installing the longer bolt is going to be making sure that your harmonic balancer puller does not hit the radiator. So you can cut the bolt down if you have to. Once that's all set, reinstall your two bolts into the puller just like we did for the original harmonic balancer bolt, and we'll pull it the same way. All right. Once the balancer is off, remove your puller. And your center bolt. And remove your balancer from the vehicle. Here we have our old part that we removed from our vehicle and our new harmonic balancer or crank pulley from 1AAuto.com. As you can see, there are some slight aesthetic differences between this pulley and the one we removed from our vehicle. However, all the important features, such as the opening for the crankshaft and the keyway, are the same. We have the same dust shield on the end here. The trigger wheel looks a little bit different. However, the TDC mark is in the same place, and as long as this rides in front of the sensor, it'll work just the same. The grooves for the serpentine belt are the same as well as the depth, height, and width of the pulley. The faces, again, are a little bit different, but we still have two bolts in case we ever have to pull this one again. And we have our center for our harmonic balancer bolt. Our new part also includes a half moon key here, which can be installed into the crankshaft to help index this if yours is missing or damaged. However, ours is in good condition, and it can be a little tricky to remove from that crank, especially without dropping it into the motor. So we're just going to leave that alone for now. So if your old harmonic balancer is creating a vibration, torn, damaged, or making noise, this new part from 1A Auto is going to go in direct fit, just like your original equipment, and fix you up right. Line up the groove on the inside of your harmonic balancer with the keyway on your crankshaft. Slide the balancer on as far as you can. Now you're going to need to use that longer bolt that you used to remove it to reinstall. You're going to need something to use as a spacer. I'm using this 1/2-inch drive 15mm socket because it takes up a good bit of space and fits over my bolt nicely. So we'll begin threading that in and then use a socket and ratchet for whatever size your bolt is to bring it down until it bottoms out. Once you've got that bolt in as far as you can, go ahead and back it out and see if your original harmonic balancer bolt will go in now. Now our harmonic balancer bolt does fit on this step, so we'll go ahead and bring that all the way down. Since our harmonic balancer fits, we'll use our 19mm socket and ratchet to bring it all the way down tight. Have a friend secure the flex plate or flywheel teeth with a long pry bar and counter hold that from turning while you torque the bolt on the end of your harmonic balancer to 37 foot-pounds. And then you'll want to add 90 degrees to that and torque to yield. Push the starter back up into the truck. You might have to try a couple of angles to get this to go back in correctly. Make sure you don't kink any wires in there, especially the ground. Now we'll reinstall the wires onto their proper terminals. The largest one going on the top terminal and being secured with a 13mm nut. And the signal wire will be secured on the side there with a 10mm. The reason I like to do this before tightening the starter in is it gives us a little more room to work. And we can make some minor adjustments to help tighten that up. And we'll tighten that down before we move on to the next wire to make sure they don't interfere with each other. Unfortunately, this is just in a really tight spot. You're just gonna have to go slow. We're using a 1/4 inch 13mm socket and ratchet here, and that's about all you can fit in there. You may use a small extension. Once you've got the 13mm tightened down, install your signal wire and the 10mm nut. We'll tighten that down with a 10mm socket and ratchet as well. Reinstall that cover that goes over all of the studs. We'll then install the 13mm bolt at the top. Get that started. And it's very important that this bolt with the stud past the nut there goes in at the bottom, because that's where our ground strap will go. Again, where these are in such a tight spot, go ahead and get those down as far as you can by hand before trying to tighten them up with your 13mm socket and ratchet. There's pretty much no way you're going to get a torque wrench in here, so just get them down as tight as you can. I'm using a 1/4 inch ratchet, so it's unlikely that we'll break the bolts tightening it down with this. Reinstall your ground wire over the stud on that bottom bolt, and the 13mm nut that secures it. Then we'll finish tightening that up as well. Now, I didn't remove the serpentine belt fully, so all I have to do to put this back together is make sure that I'm set on all of my pulleys, and we'll show you a diagram so you know which way the belt does need to be routed. Put that 3/8 drive ratchet into the tensioner, take the tension off, just counterclockwise on this, and install the belt over my water pump pulley. Then let the tension back on. Double check that you're fully seated around all of your pulleys. Mine came off the crank a little bit there while I was lining it up. Everything is on there right where it should be. We'll push the belt back onto the water pump a little straighter. There we go, I like that a lot better. Place the fan and shroud together and lower them into the truck. Just to free my hands up. Once I have it lowered in far enough, I like to spin the fan on just a couple of threads so I don't have to hold it. Remember to slide the bottom of the fan shroud into its hooks at the bottom of the radiator. Install the two 10mm nuts back at the top of the fan shroud. And tighten them down with your 10mm socket and ratchet. Once you have the threads started on the fan, you should just be able to spin the fan itself to get it in pretty close. Might not go down all the way. Right there you'll see that it stops. Now we'll get our groove jaw pliers as well as a 10mm wrench and tighten that down. Get your groove jaw pliers on the nut using a long 10mm wrench. Counter hold one of the nuts on the water pump pulley and tighten it down as tight as you can. Reinstall your air box in the intake. Make sure that your air box clicks into place. Reconnect your MAF sensor and the breather tube, and then tighten down your clamp with a flat blade screwdriver. Reinstall the cover. Tighten down the far screw with a 7mm socket and ratchet. And the front two with a Phillips head screwdriver. Tighten the clamp back up. We're going to use an 8mm socket and ratchet, or you can use a wrench. Ensure your connection is tight. Reinstall this bottom cover. It has the little plastic retainer clips that you can use to hold it into place. And then install your 4 10mm bolts with a socket, ratchet, and extension.
Thanks for watching. Visit us at 1AAuto.com for quality auto parts, fast and free shipping, and the best customer service in the industry.